Hey friend, Chris here from MyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. I don't know if you know, but this month of October 2022, at the end of the month, Why Logic Pro Rules, the channel and the website, turns 5 years old. Can you believe that? I can't believe it. And I've been sitting here filming videos every week for the last 5 years, and I still can't believe it. And I've just been blown away by the support and the kindness of you and other folks who leave comments and watch videos and likes and sends emails and just all of this stuff. I'm just so blown away by it. And on top of that, this week, I myself turned 39 years old, which that's kind of an existential thing I don't want to get into right now. But nonetheless, because October is such a tremendous month for Why Logic Pro Rules, I just want to have some fun this month, right? So for each week of October of 2022, we're just going to have fun. Of course, we'll get back to the tutorials and how to get the most out of Logic Pro. But today, I want to give you a tour of my studio, the studio that you see me sitting in each and every week. I want to give you a tour of my setup, of my studio, of my collection of mics and the gear that I'm using. So let's just have fun and let's dig into it. To start with, I'm renting a generic office space in my hometown, and I share the space with my girlfriend. She has one portion of the office space, which is dedicated to her art studio. And then I have my own studio in the other half. It's a pretty long, narrow office space. But at the front end of the studio, we have what we call the waiting room. And it's not, nobody ever waits there. But nonetheless, we try to make it look nice. It's still a work in progress. Beyond the waiting room, we have the actual studio. And when you walk in to the left, we have what I call the vocal booth. There's this weird partition that splits up the room. I don't know why, but I have an ultimate support microphone stand that's on casters on wheels, so it's easy to move around. Sometimes I use this stand for drum overheads. I like to use a coincident or XY arrangement for overheads. But on that mic stand is the Aston Spirit, which is a large condenser microphone. It's a cardioid pattern. Well, it has 3 patterns: cardioid, it has figure 8, and omni. And it is actually an awesome microphone. I like the Aston Spirit a lot. And it caught me by surprise, about $330 US. And the Spirit has that nice low and low mid thing for the chest and body of a vocalist, but also has a nice airiness in the top end. And I would consider it a more modern sounding microphone, but I've really been enjoying it. So it just stays permanently set up and connected to my Symphony desktop interface for recording vocals. And then I also have lots of acoustic treatment. You can see around the room. I'll dissect that. Before we get into that, though, I just have to point out the super cool recording sign that I have sitting on the partition in my studio. I bought this off of Etsy from an Etsy seller out of the Blue Shed, and it looks like an old RCA recording warning light. It is awesome. In my mind, I was like, oh, I'll have this sign to tell people, hey, check it out, I'm recording right now. But no, I just leave it on all the time because it looks so awesome. Digging into the acoustics of the space, I have a lot of different acoustic panels from various different manufacturers, we'll say. To start with, I have about 8 acoustic panels that I built myself. In the upper left and right-hand corners and in the back upper corner, so where the wall meets the ceiling, these are actually bass traps or broadband traps that I made myself, just with cheap wood that I got from Home Depot. I also got rigid insulation, Owens Corning fiberglass for these panels, and then I got speaker cloth from Joann Fabrics. And I just quickly made these. I'm not very handy when it comes to building stuff, but I wanted bass traps and I wanted to fill the upper corners, and there's an air gap as well, about, 12 inches or so. There's also 2-inch rigid fiberglass panels on the side walls behind me. After that, I have 7 panels that were hand built by my girlfriend's stepdad. He is such a craftsman. He's amazing. And he created 7 3-inch panels with rock wool installed in them, and the fronts also have that speaker cloth, but they're spring loaded, so you can actually open up the panels if you need to, if you want to swap out the rock wool for something else. On top of that, he also made me a 12-inch deep corner trap for the front wall behind my desk. So where the ceiling meets the wall, there's a corner trap that he made and installed. He's amazing. And after that, I have 16 panels from GIK Acoustics that I purchased. Now, if you've been around audio or music for even a brief period of time, you should probably be pretty aware of GIK Acoustics. I believe they're based in Georgia. They're a company that manufacture acoustic panels and treatments. And starting with the early reflection points around the desk, I have 2, 4, 7 of their monster traps, which are more than 7-inch thick panels that are to absorb low-end frequencies. They're broadband traps, but they go pretty low. And it was recommended to me by GIK Acoustics because my room is so narrow. It's an 8-foot wide by 9-foot high by 23-foot long room. It's a very odd shape and one I'm trying to make the best of. But I have their monster traps surrounding me. In the corners behind the desk, I have their tri-traps, which are 12-inch or maybe 18, 16 inches, somewhere in 12 to 18-inch traps that line from floor to ceiling to cover the corners, again, for low-end frequencies to absorb, because low-end frequencies are the hardest to maintain in any room. Then I have their 244s behind my studio speakers, so the front wall. On the back wall, in the vocal booth area, I have their Alpha 6As, which are 6-inch deep broadband traps with diffusers on the front. Next up, let's dig into the musical instruments in my space. Number one, my Gilbert Les Paul, which I purchased off of an old buddy of mine years ago for $350 US. The Gilbert Les Paul is a Les Paul knockoff, I believe a Korean company at one point. But the Gilbert Les Paul is actually a sick guitar. It sounds great. Anybody who's ever touched this guitar, including guys that are setting up the guitar and intonating it and making sure that it's working well, everybody loves using it and loves the sound of it. So it's impressed a lot of people. After that, I have my Fender Mexican Jazz Bass, which I bought, not lying to you, for $95 at a garage sale that my friends of mine were putting on because they were moving to Portland, Oregon. The Fender Mexican Jazz Bass is awesome. I love it. It was such a steal, and there's no way I would get rid of it. Works great, sounds great. Also have the Novation launch keys, the Mark III, the 49 key version. At one point, I had 3 different launch keys, the Mini, the 37, and the 49 key. But who needs that many keyboard controllers, frankly? So I have the 49 key. I'm not much of a piano player, but it's a great controller for those who are. So I have it set up in case someone who plays keys wants to use it. And it also has DAW controls that work really well with Logic Pro. It has faders. It has various controls for muting and soloing and working with smart controls. It's a really awesome controller at any size, the Mini to the 49 or more. And then I also have the Novation Launchpad X. I purchased all of the Launch Key series that I owned, but the Launchpad was sent to me by Novation to check out in hopes that I would do a video about it. And at first glance, I really did not think I was going to care much about it. But the Launchpad is actually my favorite controller from Novation. And if you're not someone who's really well-versed at playing piano, such as myself, the Launchpad you would think is just for beat makers or whatever, but it's actually a really wonderful controller. It fits the desktop really well. It's small, but you have access to, 64 different notes or blocks at one time. You can play many different things with a single hand, and you could set the Launchpad to different scales and keys. So you're always in that key or always in that scale. It has a live loops launcher. And it has a drum mode as well that's custom for Logic Pro. It's a great controller and by far my favorite USB controller that I've ever owned. Next up, let's talk mic collection. If I do say so myself, my mic collection is pretty humble. Even though I have about 21 microphones, most of which are duplicates and most of which are pretty cheap and not that expensive. To start with, a classic, I have 2 of the AT2020s from Audio-Technica, a classic microphone that is recommended all over the internet for the beginner. I would say it's a good microphone. I'm glad I have it. I'm glad that I got started with it. It doesn't see a lot of use in my studio anymore, but I have 2 of the AT2020s. I've got 2 of the Shure KSM 137s, which are a great pair of small condenser microphones that I'm using for drum overheads on the occasion that I record drums in the space. On top of that, I have 2 of the Octava MCO12s, and these are actually a set of the first microphones I ever owned, based on a recommendation by a friend of mine who owns a studio. And the Octavas are, a pair of small condenser microphones. They sound great. They sound natural. I also have, obviously, the Aston Spirit. We talked about that. Love that microphone. I have the Shure SM7B, the microphone that I speak into every week for my videos. If there's a single mic that I could recommend as a best all-arounder, the Shure SM7B has to be it. It's a dynamic microphone. It has a really tight polar pattern. It sounds great. It has a built-in pop filter, or you can take it off. It has some EQ controls as well. It does require a lot of gain to run, but it can handle a lot of noise as well. I have 3 of the IK Multimedia Omni MEM microphones. It's not because I'm in love with them. I've acquired them, which I'll explain momentarily. On top of that, I have the SonarWorks Omni microphone for measuring my speakers in my room. because I use speaker correction software to tune my speakers to my space. It used to be SonarWorks. Now I'm using ARC from IK Multimedia. Again, I'll talk about that later in the video. I have the AKG Perception 200 microphone, a large condenser microphone, about $300. This was the first microphone I ever got from a buddy of mine. I have 3 of the Audio-Technica ATM 230s, which I use for recording toms in a drum kit. You can get these as a pack for not very much money, and they sound great. They sound so awesome. Save yourself the money on a Sennheiser 421. Get the Audio-Technica 230s instead. We have the Sennheiser E609, which is great for recording guitars. I have 3 of the Shure SM57s because it came in a drum mic pack that I purchased. Again, one of my first microphones ever, collection of microphones that came with the Shure Beta 52, which is a great microphone for recording kick drums. But again, there's my microphone collection, about 21 microphones, and the 2 mics that get the most use in my studio are the SM7B and the Aston Spirit. Heading further into the studio, we have some shelving with some trinkets that have some emotional value to me. I'll let you figure out what those things are. But to the right behind my desk is what I like to call the Tower of Power, which is a hand-built, custom-made rack that, again, my girlfriend's stepfather built for my studio. He has done so much in the studio. I could not thank him enough. But the Tower of Power has an HP computer monitor sitting on top of it, which might seem kind of weird. Why would I have a computer monitor behind me? But I've actually found when I am recording in the space and I'm working with a couple of musicians, again, this space is very narrow. It's about 8 feet wide. And as soon as you got 1 or 2 people by the desk, there's no room for anybody else. And so much of the action in a studio now happens at the computer. And I just felt like if somebody is behind and just hanging around, I don't know, they might want to feel like they're in on the action. So I have this secondary monitor so that they could see what's going on the computer. It just mirrors what's going on the main monitor in front of me. And I've had a number of people tell me who have been in the studio, hey, I really like the fact that you have this computer monitor here so I can see what's going on. Beneath that, I have the ART Pro VLA2, which is a tube compressor that I honestly just bought for the VU meters. And I just wanted VU meters in my studio. I don't really care about outboard gear. So instead, I just have the Pro VLA rigged up. So when I play audio on my Mac in Logic Pro, the needles bounce around. That's not a knock against the unit at all. I just wanted VU meters. That's all I can say. Beneath that, I do have the ART headphone amp, the Head Amp 6, which is great. It can power up to 18 different headphones. There are 6 outputs on the front and 2 sets of outputs for each headphone amp on the back. And beneath that, I have the ART patch bay. It's an XLR patch bay so that all of the inputs for my interfaces that are living on the desk can be accessed from the Tower of Power, which brings us to the desk where I spend 90% of my time. Now, to start with, I have the output platform desk in my studio. It is an amazing desk. I love this thing so much. I'm so glad that I went on the limb and purchased it. It's awesome. It has 9U in the desk so you can rack mount gear. It has an optional keyboard tray that you can get. But with this desk, there's a cable run in the back so everything looks nice and tidy and you don't see the millions of cables running from different pieces of gear in your computer or anywhere else. It's an awesome desk. I love it. Of course, I'm running a Mac with Logic Pro because there's no other DAW worth using, in my opinion. And the Mac that I'm using is an M1 Mac Mini. And the M1 Mac Mini, honestly, is the best bang for buck that you can get. It is such a fantastic computer. It's the first generation of Apple Silicon Macs. Honestly, if you're looking to get into Apple Silicon, if you haven't already, the value of the Mac Mini, the M1 Mac Mini, for the price point, the processing power, the speed, for most users, it's the way to go, especially if portability is not a thing that you need from a computer. If you're okay with having a computer that's stationary, the Mac Mini, the M1, is awesome. I rarely hit system overloads unless, you're working with a project that has 1,000 sample-based software instruments, like an orchestral arrangement with lots and lots of instruments. Maybe you want to get a MacBook Pro with the Pro chip or the Max chip, but the M1 Mac Mini is banging. And if you're looking for a portable option, I actually recommend that you check out the M2 MacBook Air. It's pretty awesome. Along with the Mac Mini, I have an HP computer monitor, which, I like it. It does the job. It's never as pretty or as beautiful as the MacBook screens or the studio display, but it was in the right price point for me. I'm using a Mac old school keyboard wirelessly, Bluetooth, and the Magic Mouse 2, which is my favorite mouse by far. And I've tried a lot of them because I was having some wrist issues for a long time. I just have a mouse pad with a padded area for my wrist to sit on. But to go along with the Mac Mini, I also have the OWC Thunderbolt 3 dock that I use with the Mac Mini because the Mac Mini, as much as I love it, it only has 4 ports for connecting peripherals. It has 2 USB-C Thunderbolt ports and 2 USB-A ports. And that's 4 devices, right? And it has an HDMI port, but that's not enough when you're running a whole bunch of devices into your computer. So the OWC Thunderbolt dock basically quadruples the amount of ports that you have available to you with your Mac. And that could be any Mac that you're working with. And of course, I have the iPad running Logic Remote right in front of me. I often will have the Notes app with a timer in a split screen mode with my show notes when I film videos. It's really helpful to keep me on track of where I am and how long that I've been talking for. Getting into interfaces, you're going to notice there are a lot of interfaces on my desk. Let's start with the fact that, number one, I love Apogee gear so much. And I've belabored this point in other videos, so I won't belabor it here. But I had purchased the Apogee Element 24 for a video I did a couple years ago about what's the best interface for Logic Pro users. And I was so enamored with the Element 24 that I decided to upgrade and purchase the Apogee Ensemble, which is a Thunderbolt interface that Apogee no longer sells along with the Element series because certain critical parts, as far as I understand, are no longer available. And so they can't manufacture them anymore. However, the Ensemble may be the most perfect interface that Apogee has created as long as I've been using Apogee gear, only to be bested by the Symphony desktop interface. The Apogee Ensemble has tons of I/O. You can even reamp guitars with it. It's got a monitor controller section. It has a built-in talkback microphone. It includes DSP processing. It's a banging interface, and I do hope that they create a new version of the Ensemble. I'll happily purchase it, no problem. In front of it, I have the Symphony desktop, which Apogee had sent to me to review, to check out, and then they ultimately allowed me to keep the Symphony desktop because I was so in love with it. And it's the interface that I use the most. And the reason that I say the Symphony desktop is a little better than the Ensemble, it really depends on what you need from an interface. But the Symphony desktop, in my opinion, is better because of the Alloy preamp technology, which has different emulations of preamps that you can use in Drive, which is awesome. The updated DSP effects that you can run in the Channel Effects plugin, specifically the ECS channel strip, which is my favorite plugin from Apogee, but also the output on this device, the DAC. I believe it has the best dynamic range of any Apogee interface that they offer. So the Symphony desktop is tremendous value, and it has ADAT ports so you can plug interfaces in and out of it so you can get more I/O. But on top of that, I have a Symphony I/O Mark II in my studio here. It's on loan from Apogee. Why? I don't know. Just because I love this stuff and I wanted to check it out. But really, if I only could have one, the Symphony desktop would be the one I would choose. And of course, last stop in our tour today is monitoring that I'm using here in the studio. So the current speakers that I have sitting behind my desk are brand new to my studio like a week or two ago. And I was so enamored by these speakers that I sold my old speakers that I was using. So let's start there. The speakers that I had in my studio for the last 2 years prior to these new ones were the Dynaudio Lid or LYD 48s. They're 3-way monitors with a low woofer, a mid driver, and a tweeter. So there's 2 crossovers. And the hope is that it's covering, the whole spectrum from the high to the low in a very linear fashion. And they're great monitors, super stylish. I do miss the white front faces of the speakers sitting here because they look awesome. In addition to that, I also had the Dynaudio 18S sub, which is a dual woofer sub. And all that to say, not cheap, right? So I had a 4-way system in this studio. In addition to that, I was also using SonarWorks' awesome application, Sound ID Reference, to tune my speakers to my space, because despite all the acoustic treatment and the efforts to optimize the speakers for this space, it's not a purpose-built space for mixing and recording. So there was room for further improvement. But there were a couple sticking points in that setup. First, as awesome as Sound ID Reference is and its system-wide app that can run in the taskbar on your Mac so your speakers are always tuned no matter where you're listening to audio from, it introduced latency into the signal path On top of that as well, I found that mixing the low end, even in this space with SonarWorks, with a 4-way system, with acoustic treatment, was a moving target. And I was having a hard time with low end. And I just felt like, there's an opportunity to streamline here. I was looking around, and then IK Multimedia released a brand new set of monitors called the iLoud Precision MTMs. And they have a 5-inch version, a 6.5, and then they have the MTM, which is 2 woofers with a tweeter in between the 2 woofers. And I thought that seems pretty cool. They have their ARC speaker correction technology built into the speakers, so the corrective filters are stored in the speakers, not in an application on your Mac. So no latency. And they were boasting that these speakers bested speakers like 3 times or 4 times the value of the MTMs. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. I want to check these out. And I installed them. And after a couple of days, about a week at most of checking out the iLoud Precision MTMs, I sold the Dynaudio speakers, all 3. I was so impressed by the stereo imaging and the dynamic response and the ARC technology that I was like, yeah, I'll go from a 4-way system to a 2-way basically. Yeah, no problem, because these sound banging. So I'm really impressed by them. Maybe I'll do a review in the future, but I love them. So they're sitting on top of ultimate support monitor stands that are filled with stone or shot, like little pebbles to make sure that they don't resonate while the speakers are performing. Cool. So I hope you found the studio tour fun, informative, helpful, inspiring, whatever you take away from it. I hope that it was enjoyable for you. If this video was entertaining, helpful, enjoyable to you, please subscribe to the channel Wide Logic Pro Rules or subscribe on the website itself, widelogicprorules.com. Every week I'm posting new videos, emails, or posts to help you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. Thanks so much.